A brand new retro video game system is up for pre-order.
It's called the Polymega.
And it might be the most ultimate retro video game system ever made.
Hot take.
There are a bunch of reproduction video game systems on the market right now that offer new ways to play older video game systems on your modern televisions. But what's really interesting is that no one has really gone out of their way to make one that plays older systems that are based around discs, like the Sega CD, the Sega Saturn, stuff like that. But today, that's gonna change.
That's right. Yeah, we have seen some sort of like demo units saying that they could play CD-based games, but nothing has really come to fruition from that. But finally, today, the Polymega, it was announced a while ago,
yes,
but we didn't know if it was going to come out and what was going to happen with it. And today they dropped their sort of pre-order trailer, and it got a lot of people excited. So one of the things that you mentioned was something that they hadn't even announced before, which is Sega Saturn support. The Sega Saturn has always been ridiculously hard to emulate in the past,
yes.
and now we're going to have a little machine in which you can emulate or run your old Sega Saturn discs on.
Now, this is a pretty exciting proposition, but let's just talk about everything we know about the console up front now, okay? So, first off, there's a base system.
A base system. So this is a base system that comes with a dust cover, okay? If you buy this base system, it's $249.99 US, and it comes with one controller. It's a wireless controller that's that kind of shaped like a PS4 controller.
Yes, looks like the GameSir controller. If you're not actually familiar with that, we're going to pop up a picture right there.
Bam.
That's a GameSir controller.
So,
okay, nice.
So actually, Polymega themselves have licensed from another distributor that controller. So they don't make the controller itself, but they do make, of course, the console itself. So yeah, that's the base unit. And within the base unit, you have your CD-ROM drive. So with the base unit, you're going to be able to play PlayStation 1, TurboGrafx CD, Sega CD, I got a big list here, Neo Geo CD, and Saturn. And that's day one.
That's like a big list.
That's exciting for just that alone. I'm a huge PS1 collector, so for me, my jaw was squarely dropped.
Now I'm going to be totally fair on this one.
Yeah.
PlayStation 1 backwards compatibility, emulation of that sort doesn't really interest me too much, only because every PlayStation 2 and every PlayStation 3 has the capability of playing PlayStation 1 games at least.
Yes.
However, that's not the case with a lot of these other discs we talked about, because many of those games simply don't have a real easy way to play them nowadays.
We have not had an HDMI, as far as I know, we haven't had an HDMI unit console that could play TurboGrafx CDs, Sega CD games, Neo Geo CD games, or Sega Saturn games in HD or use HDMI.
Unless you modified the original systems, but once you're doing that, it's not actually taking the original graphics and putting those out to 720p. It's just kind of like making it nice and sharp.
Or using an upscaler of some sort, so like a FrameMeister.
Yeah.
But so what this console does, it does upscale. The Polymega upscales up to 1080p, and then there's so many different sort of things that you can tweak with the picture quality itself. You can have a 4:3 mode, a 16:9 mode. They talked about getting the pixel perfect sort of modes that Nintendo's offered with its classic consoles.
Yes, now that's a very important mode to offer, because basically on your modern television, if you don't have pixel perfect, what that does is it'll actually stretch the pixels out just a little bit, so it looks a little awkward. What you're seeing with pixel perfect mode on the NES Classic, on the SNES Classic, is that it kind of reshapes things down to be kind of a proper looking image.
Right, and it makes those squares just like perfect little squares. Yeah. So along with the base console itself, there are also modules. So there are 4 other modules. There's the Super module, which is Super Nintendo, and it does Super Famicom as well. This is all region free, by the way. So many notes here, man.
Yeah, and the modules, by the way, are like these big chunks that basically go on the front of the system, and through that they also offer, I believe, a port that you can put in the original Super Nintendo controller.
You can play all the original controllers with each of these modules. So yes, like I said, there's the Super module, Super Nintendo and Super Famicom. There's the Turbo module, which you would have guessed is TurboGrafx 16, PC Engine, and Super Graphics. There's the Mega module, which is the Mega Drive, the Genesis, and it also supports 32X. And there's the Power module, which is the NES module.
And that's a heck of a lot. Now, the 32X, by the way, that's actually very interesting, because most of the systems I've seen that have played older Genesis games, they typically don't offer 32X support. And the reason is that you have to take original 32X and put it in the system, and it requires some compatibility and wires and stuff. You just don't see it happen. So this, to my knowledge, is one of the very first times we've seen this happen in a console.
Right. Okay. So each of these modules, they're going to be $59.99, separate from the base system itself. They're going to include 5 preloaded games in each of the modules. I don't know what they're going to be.
Could be anything.
They just announced
the
that.
fact that there's games, period,
Yeah.
is good enough. So let's just go by that price again. The price of a module is
$59.99 American, which is around the classic systems pricing.
That's $59.99 is essentially the cost of like a game. Right? Like that's not that expensive.
Yeah.
And I mean, to really consider this is when you're getting the base model, right?
Yes.
And you've put everything together, you're only looking at a couple $100. But also, many of these consoles, if you're to go and find them by themselves, like the original ones, if you're lucky enough to find them, not only may they be in an operational state that isn't very good, but they may be actually more expensive than just getting a Polymega.
And one thing about, we were talking about upscalers. Well, one thing about buying an upscaler to play like old retro consoles, you can buy this base model console and one or two of the modules and still be under what it would be to pay for like a FrameMeister, which is going for like $500 or $600 US right now.
Exactly.
So with each of these modules, you get one controller that's in the same sort of type as what the original console had. So it's a Polymega labeled repro controller based on whatever, the Sega Genesis or the NES or whatever.
Yeah, so that's a pretty exciting proposition.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I like about this is because you can use the original controllers, you don't really have to worry too much.
That's
you
right.
just plug in the original and you should be fine.
And you can buy a heck of a lot of those for cheap. So controllers aren't really a big issue.
Now, here's something that's really interesting to me. Because of this, how is the game, because you've done research on this, how is the game actually being run on the hardware?
Yeah, okay. So the game, they're using something that they termed hybrid emulation. Okay, so hybrid emulation means that it supports classic traditional emulation in the same sense that like the Retron 5 did, where you would put your card in and it would be dumped to the console itself.
Yeah, so we've done a video on this if you haven't seen it on Rerez 1. Basically, the Retron 5 is essentially just an emulation box. When you take the cartridge, you put it into the system, it rips all the information out of that cartridge, holds it into the system's memory for a little bit. Sometimes you can hack it and actually save it, but we're not going to talk about that today. Once you've done that, the game is constantly being emulated. It's not actually running off what would be considered original hardware.
Yeah, and I know there have been emulator issues with the Retron 5 where there's some emulators that were supposedly ripped from other folks. But what's great here is that the Polymega team has stated that all the emulators that are going to be within the box itself are in-house made emulation software. So this is all them.
That's pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, but if you don't like dumping your games and you want to play directly from the physical media itself, you can.
So how are you doing that?
So yeah, again, their term hybrid emulation includes the fact that there's an FPGA field programmable gate array. You know about these more than I do, right?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So what does this do?
So we've done a review recently where we talked about the a really cool SNES style system.
The NT?
Yes.
Yes.
The Super NT.
Yeah.
Now the Super NT has an FPGA in it, and essentially what it's doing in a very dumbed down way is that it's taking the hardware of a Super Nintendo and emulating that hardware onto a single chip. The idea is that those chips are so powerful and so fast that if you put a cartridge inside the system, it basically acts like it's a real Super Nintendo.
Right.
And because of that, they can program it in a specific way to actually get the original graphics to look even better because they can just upscale those graphics dynamically on the fly because that's just how those chips operate. Now, because of that, that means that any game you're going to play on here, if they've done their job well enough, it's going to look and feel like the original hardware.
Right.
Something that emulation simply can't do. And FPGAs, well, emulation can be good in its own right, but when it comes to FPGAs, you're getting more of a traditional hardware emulation that is closer to the original aspect than you would be from software emulation.
Yeah. So basically, to dig in a little bit more, the team was interviewed, and they basically said that there's an FPGA and a custom memory controller that sits between the FPGA and the CPU, and that interprets data directly from the source media.
Yeah.
That's how they said it works. So that's it.
It's complex.
That's what it do.
We've never really seen any video game system, to my knowledge, do something like this for older video game systems. We do actually have systems in the wild right now that are more modern, that actually have certain technologies similar to this.
Yes.
But to see this done for older video game systems like the Sega Genesis, like the Super Nintendo, but specifically like the Sega CD, that's what makes this so interesting.
Yeah, a lot of the times you hear like when people don't specialize in one thing specifically, you start to worry about juggling too many too many items at the same time. I'm a little bit worried about that here, but at the same time, these units have been shown off. I don't know if the modules have so much, but the base unit itself has been showed off at different trade shows. It's been shown off at E3, and there's been a lot of fantastic press about it, and the emulation has been pretty good. Supposedly, there were some issues with the PS1 games running. There were some heat issues with the unit itself, but those are things that were, it was a model that was far from completion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Supposedly, the end model is going to be a bit better. All they had to do was reboot the system at the trade show, and then it ran perfect.
Now, what's interesting about this is typically when it comes to emulation systems, we've taken a look at multi-carts before. So the SD2, SNES,
Yep.
Those are really good cartridges that are capable of playing those original games. And many emulation systems can't actually run them because what happens is when you put in a multi-cart into the system, it takes the information from the multi-cart, but it doesn't read from the SD card or the memory card that's inside the cartridge because it's just too much memory and it doesn't have that internally into the system itself. But with this, because you're using an FPGA and because you can read directly from the cart, you technically should be able to play those kind of things on here. Now, that is a wide way to go just to play games on that hardware because essentially you're using none of the original pieces to play those games. Right. But what this is really for is for people out there that have those original cartridges or those original discs and they want to have something that's as close to the originals as possible.
That's right.
To my knowledge, I do not believe there's an FPGA version of the PlayStation, of the Sega CD, or of any of those systems.
Definitely not the Saturn, man.
Yeah.
Definitely not the Saturn.
And this is the very first time that I think we've ever seen a video game system of this era, like a reproduction system, that is actually offering not only Sega Genesis, but 32X and Sega CD in the exact same box.
Yeah, it's the specialization in some of these other disc-based systems or like these systems that don't get that much love, like the 32X system, that really make me like pretty excited about this. There's so much other information to like talk about. I did see a little bit of the operating system, and the way that it's kind of set up is that it's almost like a Netflix like setup where you have your strips of different games that you've dumped to the system itself. It seems like a great way of collecting games or taking your collection and placing it onto the system itself. Internal memory, there's going to be very little memory for saving your games with the unit itself, but they said that it's SD card memory.
Okay, that's fine.
It's going to support 500 gigs immediately, and there is a 1 terabyte SD card being manufactured right now somewhere within the tech ethos, and that'll be supported as well.
You're not going to need that much. Now, okay, you know what? I was going to say you didn't need that much space, but when you're dealing with discs, yeah, you might actually need that. But with the original games, you should be able, with original cartridge games, you should be able to pretty much get everything under a couple of
cartridges,
gigs.
not a problem. Here's the thing. They're talking about Dreamcast.
On the system?
They didn't announce it, but in several of their interviews, they're talking Dreamcast.
Okay, now you got my interest. I was already excited about this now, but the idea that you could be playing Dreamcast games on this, that's something else. Really, though?
They're talking Dreamcast, and it's all based on some of the some of the rights are going to be over for some of the like system architecture, I guess.
Yeah, it's when you basically when those architecture systems. They go into the public domain after a couple of years. Yeah.
So what's going to be in the public domain relatively soon is the N64, and they talked about an N64 module as well, and that will be.
So you release a $50 or $60 module, but I like these guys a lot. This is good. This is good. Now look, this is the kind of stuff that collectors should be super excited about because having these systems out in the wild...
I just remembered another thing.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Having these systems out in the wild is a big deal because that means the original cartridges become a lot more valuable when you have ways to play them. For instance, we've had issues playing Neo Geo CDs on modern systems because Neo Geo CDs have a lot of problems running on modern systems simply because they're older. It's the diodes on them, the laser diodes, they age. The same issue exists with the Sega CD and the TurboGrafx CD as well, too.
That's what makes this very exciting. Thank you for bringing up the Neo Geo CD because the developer of this unit itself has said not only does this play Neo Geo CD, but it plays it better than the original Neo Geo CD and the other Neo Geo CD that came out, I think only in Japan, that played it a little bit faster. I think it was the Neo Geo X. This plays the Neo Geo CD games at 80% better than those original consoles does. So it takes a 3-minute load time and turns it into a 30-second load time.
That's because the disk speeds we have nowadays are a lot faster than what was available available at the time.
Yes.
That is pretty amazing, right?
That are optical drive.
Now, because of all this, can we take ROM files and just dump them directly into the system? Have they stated that?
They've stated, they didn't state that like they didn't want to support some sort of piracy, but they said, look, we're not, they don't seem like they're battling piracy all that much. They said it's going to happen one way or another. They just hope that they're giving options to the consumer at such a low sort of price point that people will like just want to collect games and bring their collections in. That's basically what they've said.
Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that are okay with piracy and stuff like that. Maybe there's like an older collection in here. Have they talked about Atari 2600 at all or anything like that?
From what I've seen, there's no talk about 2600 right now.
Okay, here's the thing I'm so curious about. I really want ROM support, not because of piracy issues and stuff like that, but because I want to be able to support having patches on games so that I can actually play translated versions of games. For instance, if we're doing Saturn, Saturn's the best way to play Police Knots.
There's patches.
Okay.
There's a section in the OS that says patches, and you can patch because one of the creators in an interview said, "Hey, I love playing JRPGs. I love playing JRPGs. As some of them have not been translated. Some of my favorite games have not been translated. You can patch in the English dialogue or other like media into games using the system."
This may just be the ultimate video game system.
The more I've been digging into, okay, look, we have not gotten this physical hardware yet, so like jumping on and fanboying is you should never do.
Maybe I can offer a couple criticisms.
Yeah,
okay?
Go ahead.
That's a lot of systems to be designing. If they're doing it internally, that is a lot of information they need to go for, and there may be a lot of issues at the very beginning. That's just a guess. I don't know. We could be wrong. Maybe they're godlike and they already have all this stuff done, but there is that chance that they may run into issues because they're just trying to support so much all at once.
So what does kind of make me feel good about this project is, I don't think I've mentioned this yet, some of the team that's working on this have legitimately been working on video games in the industry. Okay, these are people that have worked on games like Ratchet and Clank and the Titanfall series that are making this. And this isn't a Kickstarted thing, right? We've had some sort of iffy things with some Kickstarter campaigns in the past. They basically took a proof of concept unit, they brought it to a trade show, and then after folks, there was a lot of hype, I guess, at whatever show they brought it to, I'm not sure which one, they went back to investors, and investors invested, I believe it was $500,000 in the unit, and they've been using that money to develop what we're seeing today.
Okay, so my next thing would be, there seems to be a lot of controllers they're manufacturing internally. I do like the idea that they're licensing that GameSir design there. I want to see that a lot more because making controllers is actually a very difficult prospect. And if you don't get the right feel correct, people may just not they might think that the games aren't running the way they're supposed to just if you're using a bad controller. Now, with all of this being said, this makes me think of something that was theorized once a long time ago.
Okay.
Like, I think it was a couple of my friends and I, we just sat in a room, we were talking about like games and stuff like that. If you have a system like this that supports so many games from the past, and we know right now that the market exists where people are making reproduction carts, will we see reproduction CD-ROMs coming directly from manufacturers? Could SNK Neo Geo start reproducing CDs that they made in the past? Could we see TurboGrafx games and PlayStation games getting reissued and reprinted?
That would be incredibly exciting. If there was a system that could play those discs and it gained as much momentum, like if it just exploded and was huge, I could see maybe some smaller companies that want to return to their prior IP and make some money off of beloved classic games. Like that could be an easy way for them to not only bring those games back, but maybe even start building up momentum for another release in that series.
Exactly.
Right?
When we just recently covered RetroBit's recent re-releases of R-Type and R-Type
Holy
3.
Diver.
Yeah, and Holy Diver.
Yes.
And those games are just like the original cartridges. They've just added a couple of extra features so that you can go between the menus. And in the cases of Holy Diver, it's basically the exact same game. They just brought over to the cartridge for North America. These ideas that right now you have companies that are doing reproduction cartridges, this is the kind of console they can aim for. Like they could say plays best on the Polymega, stuff like that. And this could be the way that people play these games. I firmly believe that there's a larger market out there for CD-based games, but we've had a lot of issues with that simply because of the consoles are so prohibitively expensive.
Right, yeah. And we just have not had another unit that could play those games. So if you wanted to play a CD-based game, you had to get a Sega Saturn, and you had to deal with the battery issues. that a Sega Saturn has. Same thing with a Sega CD. You want to play a Sega CD game, you got to buy a Genesis and a Sega CD, and then, I mean, there's always emulation, right? But if you want to play it on a legit system, you'd have to have there's issues with belts, there's issues with the lasers, there's issues with batteries. It's like, I would love to have a modern system that would allow all of that functionality in one unit.
Okay, so we know it's region free.
Yes.
All right. Does it support every accessory? Like, are we going to be able to support light guns and stuff like that?
No light guns. And as far as the E3 build, it didn't support FX chips yet.
Okay.
But it sounded like it was coming just around the corner.
Well, if it's a software thing, that's something they could eventually, it's something they have to build in there. And let's be fair, I have seen that happen with the Super NT. They do have FX chip support in the system. So, and here's the great thing: an FPGA, software upgradable through firmware updates, right? So you can actually have updates happen that way, so that the system can eventually just run more systems, as long as it's powerful enough. And if it's already at a spec where it can run things like PlayStation and Sega Saturn, you're essentially right where you want to be to run a lot of those entry-level things. And if they're already talking about Dreamcast, you're really, really close. Like, that's not too far out there.
Yeah, so digging into a little bit more of the functionality, so online, hey, you can stream on Twitch with this.
That's good.
They're talking about a subscription service where you can play classic games. Paying monthly.
I'm fine with
Netflix.
that. Yeah, I want. That's something I like. Honestly, nobody seems to offer that now. And if they're working with game developers right now to get a library on there, that's a big deal.
They're partnered with Moby Games.
It's like they're doing all the right moves. Like, it's like they just know who to reach out to and who to talk to make the things happen.
The thing is, they're promising a lot.
They are.
So, like, I've been burnt in the past. As excited as I am, there's always a part of me that's going to be like, I don't know if they can do this.
Okay. Let's see if we're going to make somebody upset. How about if somebody bought the Polymega and they want to play their older style video games on their older TV? They can't do that though, right?
It's HDMI. I believe it's just HDMI.
Just HDMI?
Yeah.
There you go. We finally found something this isn't going to work
Maybe
for.
you can convert your HDMI signal.
You can.
If you want it to feel like an RGB or a composite signal, they have filters for that.
There's
endless. Like, I could go in, like, guys, I spent like 3 hours going over all the interviews and like going through everything that they've spoken about. It sounds too good to be true. Until I get this in my hands, it's too good to be true. But I'd love to imagine that this works out 100%.
What I like about this, though, is that I have a good feeling about this, because everything I've heard from this company, I've heard about Polymega a while ago. Everything I've heard, everything that's been discussed, everything that they've said have been positive things, obviously, because it's marketing. But one of the things I liked the most was they're not gloating about it. They're not showboaters. They're not trying to. It doesn't look like they're trying to scam people into buying this.
They did that on purpose.
Yeah.
So they first showed off, like, this is a thing that's happening. They went radio silent. They did some stuff on the forums, answered a lot of questions, and they didn't show us a unit until they were ready to, until they were confident in what they had to show off.
That's what I like.
So yeah, if this confidence pours over into the final product and we see a product that is as is listed, I know a lot of retro collectors are going to be very happy about this.
Now, I'm just going to say this because I think it'd be pretty cool. I have one dream system I would like for them to support on here.
Oh, I hope they mentioned it already. Go ahead.
Virtual Boy.
Oh,
In fact, Game Boy Advance, Game Gear.
They did do a little soundbite snippet about this.
Yes, I want to see portable systems in this format, because right now the only way to play those systems on your television is to use something like a Super NT with a Super Game Boy, or maybe the HDMI upscaler on the GameCube that we've shown off in the past, with the Game Boy Advance player on the GameCube to play those games on there. But I really want to see something like this. It's a direct cartridge-based system that does that. And not RetroPie, the very recent looks at hardware, at software emulation we've seen on certain systems have offered cartridge support like that, but not hardware emulation with an FPGA. And if they did that, that'd be really, really cool.
Okay. So while this does not support handheld games in the traditional handheld sense, they said, hey, if we want to get into that market, we believe they should be kept handheld. If our company does well, chances are you're going to see a handheld system that has different functionality, modules, and things.
Sure.
this does support the Super Game Boy.
Does it?
Yes.
There we go. I mean, it's. I'm good, folks. But look, what do you think?
Yeah.
Does this sound too good to be true? Is this like the gamer's dream coming in fruition?
There's still so many things we didn't talk about, but I think we got the gist of it here. Well, we should wrap it up.
Yeah, this is a lot to take in, but folks, I think that there's something really interesting about this. I think the company has been incredibly smart.
Play Magi is the company.
Play Magi. They've been very smart about this. Yep. It sounds like they have a lot of promising features up front, and it doesn't look like they're saying anything that's impossible. It sounds like they're saying a lot of things that you could do.
It is a lot of promises.
Yeah, so I'm excited, but what do you think? Do you believe this is something that is going to be like a thing that actually happens, or do you think this is going to be a little bit of vaporware? Let us know what you think in the comments below.